Welcome to the audio fiction podcast, The History Singer, written, produced, and voiced by me, your host, Jan Nichols. You should know that the story is told in sequential order, so start with 101 and carry on. Also, The History Singer is written in changing first-person narrative. From time to time, you'll hear me say a character's name. That's your cue that the following section is from that person's perspective. And now, our story continues. Eliphus Grace. I was studying the mended wagon wheel. Do you think it will hold until we make Vrenholm? I asked Tooty. He was the eldest brother of the 6 little men and the least likely to drink from the cider barrel, though it wasn't unheard of. Sunlight picked out an orphan white hair in one of Tooty's eyebrows as he and 2 of his brothers, Presto and Nuto, kicked the wheel as if to assess its fitness. Best replace it at River's End, Tooty said. I'd not trust it on the high pass to Vrenholm. Presto and Nuto nodded in agreement. All right, I said, wiping sweat from my face with a linen kerchief. Now that Arianthe is well enough to travel, we will leave the day after tomorrow. The brothers looked upward in unison. Thanks be to Apollo, god of music, healing, prophecy, and truth. Raised from birth as street musicians, gymnasts, entertainers, and opportunistic pickpockets, the little men were as devout in their fealty to the ancient god Apollo as they were profane in their pun-ridden stories. Their remarkable mother Hester was a giantess from the far north, and the only woman in the known lands to have given birth to sextuplets. She raised them in and around public houses where she served drink and knocked heads together when patrons got too rowdy. The little men, for they were small in stature as Hester was big, learned to fight as one when insults crossed the boundary to become a threat. Arianthe interrupted my reverie as she ran up to me, cheeks flushed and chest heaving. The scar at my throat itched as I tied the kerchief around my neck, giving instructions to the little men. Let the others know to start packing up. We start for River's End at first light on the morrow that follows next day. I turned to Arianthe. Your color is much improved, I said, as I took in everything about her appearance, the lovely sundown glow of her cropped hair and the softness of her cheeks, not yet stretched by time and care. I took her arm as we walked through camp to the wagon she shared with Soba. What is troubling you? I asked. Arianthe looked up at me under dark lashes, a smile aligning her irregular features into something more compelling than beauty. How do you do that? She said. How do you always know when something is bothering me? I laughed, a deep, full-throated sound that erupted from the stony prison of my heart. You are my daughter in every way that matters, I smiled, and you are my heir, the inheritor of the histories I once sang. I am your teacher, but I have been studying you every day of our life together. We took a few steps off the worn path, facing the stand of young lodgepole pines that sheltered Arianthe's wagon. Arianthe held out an envelope without saying a word. I turned it over, running the rough skin of my thumb over the fine paper. I extracted the note and read aloud. The words hung in the air between us, as if self-aware of their importance. When he returned, Bacanyi said he had something to give you. I thought it was a book, or perhaps some small trinket. I had no idea it was an invitation from Lord Vrenik, I said. I held the note at arm's length, a viper that might strike at any moment. Arianthe nodded yes, swallowing. She swallowed again. He said the note was given him by Lord Vrenik's own man, that he didn't know its contents, and that he was just a messenger. A great wind came up, sudden and sharp, lifting Arianthe's hair straight out, rust seaweed floating on water. I stared at her, my hollow eyes seeing things that she could not. Come, Arianthe. I gripped her elbow, firm, almost to the point of pain. We must help with the packing up. We leave for River's End Holding the morrow after next. I held a calloused finger to my lips. Say nothing of this for now. Agreed? "Yes, Eliphus," she said. The wind came up again and almost whipped away her words. But what does it all mean? Toby Grace. I left Arianthe with Bacanyi, stabbing every tree on my way back to the wagons. When angry, I found it soothing to occupy my hands with something besides signing. I had always preferred the company of animals over people, unless the person was Arianthe. I rested my forehead against the warm flanks of our nanny goat as I did the milking. It was peaceful, in the same way that being underwater felt like the place I belonged, in the world, without being touched by it. I hummed. Most would think it grunting, while staking out a chicken wire enclosure. Our ragtag collection of hens and a surly rooster were freed from their coop daily to peck at grass and stone and cluck at one another. Cleaning the portable coop was a nasty business, but our lives moved between the rigor of rehearsals, the thrill of performing, and the mundane tasks of life. My mare Vox stood nearby, tied to a convenient tree branch. She grew skittish on the tether line, and, like her rider, enjoyed the company of animals other than her own kind. I curried and brushed Vox until she shook her head and snorted in my face. "You have been patient," I signed against her pristine mane. "Here is your reward." I pulled a small apple from an inside pocket of my waistcoat, and Vox was dainty as she took it from my flattened palm. Wishing I had taken a bite out of the apple first, I realized I was starving. We were to have a feast tonight in honor of Arianthe's recovery, so I headed over to the river to wash and to swim. At first, I thought it was my imagination, for my underwater vision was much clearer than usual. I surfaced to see if my eyesight was different in the open air. When I blinked, something moved in both eyes. There was no pain, it was just odd. I submerged my face underwater and surfaced a dozen times to see if it would happen again. It did. A protective covering of some kind descended from a place behind my eyelids. It enhanced my underwater vision and protected my eyes from the river's swirling debris. My great yell of delight rolled along the river bottom as I allowed currents to pull me this way and that until I arrived at a deep pool near the riverbank. Looking up, I saw the white underbelly of a fish, seeking buggy delicacies closer to the surface. My belly raged with hunger. I don't know how it happened. One moment I was me, and the next I was a predator. The fish was squirming, impaled on my incisors as I tore out its midsection. It tasted of blood, tender flesh, and fine bones. I snatched the remains that had fallen from my mouth and ate those too. I was exultant, powerful, and alive as I had never been before. Then I thought of Arianthe and realized she would be repulsed by the blood streaming down my chin and the bone bits between my teeth. "She must never know," I said, air bubbles escaping as I spoke. I leapt out of the water to land on the riverbank, a flying fish boy man-thing vomiting gobs of blood, raw fish, a great quantity of bones, and a pile of thin, deadly, sharp teeth. Rolling away from the mess, I felt inside my mouth, relieved to find that my natural teeth were where they should be. I rolled to my back, watching willow branches sway, sweeping their shadows back and forth. Bringing my hands to rest on my chest, I saw that the flesh between my fingers had grown upward to the tip of my nails. I had the webbed hands of a water creature. My clothes dried as I walked back to camp, and the webbing between my fingers retracted. Though pleased that my body had returned to normal, I wasn't repelled by the changes, or even afraid of them. It felt as if I were becoming my true self. It was another secret from my private treasure house, a place where no one else could enter, not even Arianthe, not yet. Lord Soren Vrenik. Ashta slipped in shortly after Kusith had left, accompanied by my most trusted spy, Horsemaster Ulrich Hakon. "You are still breathing," Ashta said, giving me a head-to-toe appraisal. I was the lord here, but she had a way of making me feel like one of Ulrich's skittish thoroughbreds. Ulrich doffed his weather-beaten leather hat and begged pardon. "My lord," he said, making a florid bow, "if I am not needed, we have received a tribute of horses from the steppes, which need my attention." "Of course, Ulrich," I said. "Join me for supper and tell me of the ill-tempered Yurdish mounts we have been gifted." He grinned through gritted teeth, bowed again, and departed. "I am pleased that you draw breath," Ashta said in the tongue of her desert tribe, one of many among the Sahai. It had been almost a year since Ashta had arrived at my court. She had been sent as an ambassador from the Memory Keepers. Before her arrival, I had thought the reclusive sisterhood did not concern themselves with life beyond their holy isle. I was as wrong about that as I had been about the purpose of Ashta's mission to Vrenholm. She was sent to find out if I was worthy to receive the secrets in her possession. If I had not been, I have no doubt that I would be dead, even if my formidable guardsmen stood between us. Ashta's voice was pitched low for a woman, with the grit of singing sand in its seductive tones. She hadn't moved from the doorway, but I could feel her presence, sexual, and if she chose it to be, deadly. I turned away from my contemplation of the unscalable peaks in the distant uttermost north. I was mountain-born, bred of the bones of the earth. My father used to say, "Thanks be to all the gods that the man has passed." The good people of Vrenholm thought I had killed the monster who was their king. They love me for it. But alas, someone else beat me to it. "Your thoughts take you far from here, my lord," Ashta said, still standing in the doorway. I knew that she wasn't waiting for my permission to enter. She was waiting for my attention. Smiling, I turned to look at her and caught my breath. She wasn't the most beautiful woman I had ever met, but she was the most compelling. And the most dangerous, I thought. Ashta was something more than the sum of her green eyes, even more vivid than Kusith's. Her teeth, white as new mountain snow, complemented her flawless ebony skin. She wielded her sexuality as a weapon, and with her sword she engaged her opponents in a dangerous foreplay that could end in their death. Ashta shivered imperceptibly. I knew enough to know that it would be impolite to ask if she was discomfited by the cold. She smiled, as if sensing my thoughts. "Did you know," she said, "that the myths of my forebears said that Kione, your goddess of snow, amused herself by turning men into ice sculptures? My ancestors were fascinated by the idea that skin could burn in the cold, as it did in the heat of our desert sun. I would have welcomed the north wind to quell the heat pulsing through my body. I stood there, striving to look like a man who did not want to sweep everything off his desk and take her without care for the risk. I have come to speak with you about our project in Kione's playground," she said, sitting opposite my desk. With an almost imperceptible hand gesture, she indicated her wish for a glass of the mulled wine, still warm from the heating cube behind me. "Sahadanyi," I said, handing her a ceramic mug, then sitting to face her. Ashta took a small sip and her eyes widened at its potency, even with the added fruit and spices. The people of the great desert, which they called Sahai, drank sparingly of wine and spirits. She spoke quietly in her native tongue and slowly so that I could follow. Manassen, my shirt-tail kin, is an acolyte with the sisterhood. She tells me that the one who had been long dormant has awakened and left the Isle of Memory. Ashta cupped the mug in both palms for warmth, but she did not drink. Are you saying that a decomp who has hovered between life and death is now freely roaming Nurth? I asked in disbelief. Yes, Ashta said. Manassen, nor any memory keeper, tells lies. They may withhold information, but they never lie. She told me that the decomp said his awakened name is Lathe, and that the other awakened would be known as Tekte. The dead, I said, my voice hushed, and I admit more than a bit awestruck. What do they look like? Manassen's report says they do not look like what you and I think of as the dead. Their bodies are intact. There is no sign of decay, and no stench of death. Their flesh has a golden sheen to it, she says, and their eyes are a varying shade of silver. I think I would find them beautiful, Ashta murmured. What of this Lathe, I asked. What do we know of him? Very little, Ashta said. Nemazine, the eldest of the memory keepers, told her sisters that Lathe had awakened on old Earth, and that the gods who delivered humanity to Nurth brought him with them. Ashta paused and actually took another sip of wine. That's unusual, I thought. What isn't she telling me? Lathe asked the sisters to give you a message, she said. What? I said, giving up any pretense of calm. How does he know I exist? Ashta shrugged, saying, This tale is shrouded in mystery, as is the message he sent. Tell me then, I said, sounding harsh and bitter as my father ever did. Here is his message, as it was reported to me, Ashta said, going within to retrieve the exact words. He said to tell you that he honors your plans to stop the Learned Council from taking children as tektides. He said that he will help you build a citadel in Kihoni's playground to counter the might of Renatus. He said that he will send Tekte to the north to aid in the building of it. He also said that, when the time is right, you will help the Tekte defeat an even greater enemy. Oh, is that all? I said in an attempt to sound nonchalant. When overwhelmed, I found it helped to focus on details, small things I could comprehend. How will the thousands of Tekte we'll need get to Kioni's playground? I asked. As to how the Tekte travel, Lord Vrenik, it appears that they walk, Ashta said, apparently in all weather, across any terrain, and they do not stop to rest. Before I could speak, Ashta continued. My operatives say that Tekte are gathering in the Danusian River Valley. Some are gruesome in appearance, for though awakened, their bodies still bear the marks of death. From time to time they halt in mid-step, and appear to be listening to something that none of my people can hear. We live in strange times, Sahadanyi, I said. She patted her wine-stained lips with a fine linen cloth, saying, Time itself is strange, my lord, but the things people do are as ever, even stranger. I stood to pace before the double-insulated north-facing window, a great extravagance that my father would not have approved. She joined me in my pacing, her movements fluid and quick as sand dances on the wind in her desert home. Adjusting the hood of her Sahadanyi robes to cover the delicate curve of her neck, Ashta turned her back to the vertiginous view, sitting with an otherworldly grace on the cushioned window seat. Now, she said, tell me about the girl. I joined Ashta, sitting as far away as possible. The physical distance was a sign of respect. Born to the endless sands, the Sahai did not take kindly to those who violated their personal space, unless kin rights had been granted. Ashta had shown great restraint at my court, for almost every man, and quite a few women, had propositioned her at close quarters. If they only knew that the punishment for such behavior was the loss of a hand, But being a civilized people, the Sahai allowed the offenders to choose which hand would be forfeit. If the offense was repeated, males would be neutered, and females would forfeit the remaining hand. "The girl," I said, "is Arianthe Grace. She is the heart-daughter of Meister Eliphus Grace, who once served on the Learned Council, and was once himself a notable singer of the histories. People I trust tell me that the girl will surpass his ability." I stood to retrieve my wineglass, twirling it by the stem as I returned to the window seat. "History is a fractured thing," I said. "Just as this crystal bends light to reveal colors we cannot see, the past can be bent by its tellers, and shaped yet again by its listeners. Get it out, Soren. If Ashta thinks you are a madman, so be it. I won't bore you with the story of how I came to study at the Schola in Renatus, but I was far happier there as a student of history than I was here, in my father's keep." I brushed something off my cheek and kept talking. "In addition to my studies, I spent every spare moment in the library, pestering the good Meister Archivist with questions. In defense of his sanity, Meister Micah put me to work, cataloging ancient documents from the time before the gods delivered us to Nurth." I paused for a swallow of wine, seeing that Ashta now sat tailor fashion on the window seat, her dark eyes wide and attentive. "So much was lost during the end time on old Earth," I continued. "Their electronic machines and the documents they stored fell into disrepair, but thousands and thousands of citizens from every part of Earth volunteered to transcribe the information, to write it down, to preserve it for the future, for us. In a way, it felt like they were writing for me, for I had to read the documents before I could properly catalog them. In the 7 years I was at the Schola, I pieced together a story so unbelievable I didn't tell anyone, not even Meister Micah," I said. "It appears that a plague was unwittingly released as part of a great undertaking. Countless people, many millions of them, died because the plague spread fast and killed quickly. The rest came out in a rush. Simply saying the words aloud made me feel like a madman, or at the very least, a foolish one. I found no writing that told me what the great experiment was, but there was a fragment, blood-stained and hastily written. I quote it now from memory. "Our undertaking has failed, but it did not fail for all time. Not all who died are dead. They will awaken to protect humanity. They will awaken when the singer of celestial songs arises." "Soren," said Ashta, who never used my familiar name, "tell me what you think." "I believe that the awakened in the ancient writings are the same as those who Lathe has now named Tekte. I ask myself why their leader, Lathe, is so willing to help us create a center of technology in Keona's playground. How does our plan to abolish the taking of children as tech tithes and freely share tech with all the known lands align with their interests? How, indeed, does Lathe even know these things? But I think the Tekte have a plan of their own and a purpose that has something to do with the end of days on old Earth. And I think the girl, Arianthe Grace, is key to their plan." Ashta nodded her head, as if the outlandish things I had just said confirmed something she already suspected. "I will send a message to my sisters, Lotus and Luna," she said. "They and other members of the Ladies' Players have secretly protected the girl since she was an infant." I stared at Ashta, shocked and wondering what else I did not know. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you did, I have a small ask. To make it easy for you or your friends to follow the show, just use this link. It goes like this: followthepodcast.com/HistorySinger. That's it. Easy. Also, if you'd like to leave a rating and review to help others discover the show, I have an easy link for that too. Simply go to lovethepodcast.com/HistorySinger. You know, I thought I made this podcast for me because I felt compelled to tell this story. Now, I realize I really made it for you.